For everyone to know, sometimes Rinpoche comes slightly later because he works for His Holiness, and sometimes if he's in the office, he's not able to leave right away. But I just called him and he said he's on his way. He's coming. So that means he's about to sign in, I guess.
Dashdile Rinpoche. We cannot hear you yet, Rinpoche.
Dashdile.
Dashdile Rinpoche.
Today,
Very kind Rinpoche. No, Rinpoche very busy. O Sashi Perki Jukche Metok from Rirapling Zini de Gyempadi Sange Zingdu Mikte Uwayi Rokunam Datsing. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guratna Mandala Kamnyayatayami. Could Rinpoche lead us in a refuge prayer, Rinpoche?
O Sanje Chudang Suju Jonang La Shangyu Dagi Chushi Jive Tunang Jin Dola Vinjir Sanjen Rubar Shu Sanje Chudang Suju Jonang La Shangyu Bardo Dani Jagu Dagi Chushi Jive Tunang Jin Dola Vinjir Sanjen Rubar Shu Sanje Chudang Suju Jonang Shangyu Bardo Dani Jagu Ji Dagi Chushi Jive Tunang Dola Vinjir Sanjen Rubar Shu
as first, I need to. I'm sorry that I'm a little later. Yeah, wasn't able to be here in time, and so Rinpoche will continue to teach. So Rinpoche will first recite a prayer to prepare himself for the teachings. And yesterday we got to, well, yesterday means last time, we got to, so what we talked about was in general that Dharma is something has to do with the mind, but with a mind that has to be subdued. So if we don't subdue our own mind, if we leave our mind, then there'll be problems, there'll be suffering. Therefore, subduing our mind leads to well-being, to happiness. Therefore, happiness and unhappiness is all dependent on subduing or not subduing the mind. Therefore, that which causes all our trouble, or the root of all our problems, is an unsubdued mind. And here we talk about the afflictive emotions that cause our trouble, and the root cause of that, of course, is the self-grasping. Therefore, we talk about Buddhism is all about subduing self-grasping. And so we've addressed this already also as part of the question and answer session, and also the previous sessions we talked about self-grasping. And this is something we should pay an interest in. It's something really important. And it's not something that we can come together a few times and talk about this. This is not enough for us to gain a good understanding of what selflessness, what self-grasping is all about. And that being the case, so when we say that from self-grasping, the other afflictive emotions arise. So attachment, anger, and so forth. We need to understand the different kinds of afflictive emotions. So the 6 root afflictions or 10 root afflictions, and then there are 20 secondary afflictive emotions. And from there, all the other different types of, well, the different kinds of behavior arise, different kinds of conduct. And so this kind of conduct, these kind of actions, countless actions that arise from afflictive emotions, well, we need to understand what gives rise to them, these afflictive emotions. We need to pay special interest, or have special interest, develop a special interest in them, to understand that we're kind of caught in these afflictive emotions. So when we study their afflictive emotions, when we listen to the Dharma, when we teach the Dharma, they're always the afflictive emotions. Also, when we meditate, they're afflictive emotions. Actually, when we meditate, we should be practicing the Dharma, but even at that time, while we meditate, there will be afflictive emotions, they will arise. So, for instance, you may think, oh, I'm a great meditator, I do this really well. So that it may lead to arrogance and attachment and so forth. So, for instance, it may lead to desire and so forth. So our afflictive emotions, they're so clever. They're so clever, as in like they deceive us, deceiving us as in like giving us the impression that benefit us. But that's actually not true. They're actually just deceptive. They're harmful. They're really clever in a negative way, in that they harm us in so many different ways. So that we need to understand. We need to understand how they work, how these afflictive emotions work, how they appear, to make some changes. And for instance, in Shantideva's text, it also talks about identifying the different afflictive emotions. When he says that all this world, that these worlds are like thorns, like the whole world is covered. It's like covered by thorns, and we can't cover the entire world with leather. But what we can do is we can put leather under our feet, and that has the same effect as covering the entire world, because then these thorns, whatever would pierce our feet otherwise, well, it can't harm us any longer. So that's the example that is given. And that's important that we understand that, as in like, it's okay, of course, in a way we can apply all the antidotes to each and every afflictive emotion, but the best way is to apply the one antidote that is effective with regard to each of these antidotes. So the self-grasping. So with regard to our thoughts, we have different afflictive emotions, and we need to take those. We need to use, or we need to become aware of the strongest ones, and then understand what kind of karma we generate. So what kind of karmic actions we accumulate. So with regard to the thoughts that arise, then the verbal actions and so forth, and become aware that they give rise to suffering in the future, in the next life, and so forth. So it's important, this kind of sequence, how one cause gives rise to which effect and so forth. But it's, of course, within that, we need to also understand that the root cause is self-grasping, and that our body, our 5 aggregates, especially our body, is in the nature of suffering. It seems to be in the nature of happiness, but it's actually in the nature of suffering. And we perceive that which is suffering to be happiness. And therefore, it's important. We need to understand that really what's the actual nature of our existence. So we're mistaken. We're mistaken with regard to our body, for instance. Actually, in the nature of suffering, we don't see it as being in the nature of suffering. We believe it to be happiness, to be in the nature of happiness, that its final nature is actual happiness. That's how we believe that, how we perceive this body. So we have the sense we have to hold on to it. We have to hold on to this body. It's so precious to us. We cherish this body. And even so, we don't see that there's something greater, something more precious. We feel this body, our life, is the most precious thing we have. We don't realize there's something greater, something more precious. But it's actually just a vessel. It's just a boat that we can use to overcome this limited existence. But actually, it's nature. It's actual nature. Is suffering. It's pains in the nature of suffering. As long as we have this body, that for that long we will experience the sufferings of aging, of sickness, of birth, and so forth. So the situation is just going to get worse having this body, as in like whatever pleasure we experience, it will not last and will turn into suffering. And we have to have this body carried around. We have to look after it, nourish it, etc. And there's so many problems that arise from just having this body, like just trying to nourish it, try to keep it healthy, and so forth. Therefore, so we need everything. We also have this expectations that everything is good. We have a healthy body, a good body. We also want to have pleasant experiences. We want to hear nice sounds, eloquent words, and so forth. So there's just this desire to have all this pleasure, again, dependent on the body. Therefore, with regard to the worldly kind of experiences we have. So there was a sense it's not okay to be unwell, and so the desire to not to be unwell, etc. So all this leads to a lot of suffering. Therefore, we should see that this body is in the nature of suffering. There's not. So what we try to reach, the state we want to reach, is the state of not taking on a body like this. Here we talk about liberation as the state of not having to take on another limited body like the body we have right now. And so continuing with what we got to last time with regard to the text here. So here we speak about that which appears, objects, subjects, all these different objects that appear to us. So there's so many of us. So with regard to external objects, and then with regard to the internal phenomena and so forth, so other minds, consciousness, and so forth, all those, there's so many of them, so many aspects. So there's like no end to the different appearances of these objects. So all of those are actually the nature of the mother. So in verse 3, it says, this diverse subject-object world is my mother's gentle smile. So we were talking about cyclic existence. We are within cyclic existence. All the objects we experience, they are actually like my mother's face or her gentle smile. So therefore, it's because of emptiness that phenomena appear to us. So because we don't understand emptiness, that's because we don't realize it, that's why we are within samsara. So just because we don't realize what emptiness actually refers to, that's why it deceives us. We say it's her deceptive words. We talk about deception. Sometimes when we don't understand, sometimes we feel the other person deceives us. Actually, the other person doesn't deceive us. It's us not understanding it. So it's not really putting the kind of blaming the mother for this, but this is just saying not understanding really the meaning of emptiness. Therefore, this cycle of birth and death are deceptive words. So if we really were to understand how emptiness exists, well, then we would be free. We would be able to free ourselves from cyclic existence. If we really understood the mother, we understood our mother, then we would be able to overcome what's in the way to attaining liberation. So this is a poetic kind of way of talking, that the mother is like her deceptive words. And then next is like the release from cyclic existence. It relies on emptiness. That's verse 4. And then it also talks about the brother and the father. So here we talk about the appearances. So here the brother in particular refers to appearances or dependent arising. So whether you say sister or brother, it talks about the method. It talks about the method really in terms of dependent arising. So dependence on thinking of dependent arising, then we are able to overcome samsara. So here it's verse 4, lines 3 and 4. It is ultimately in your kindness alone, O Mother, that my hopes for freedom lies. So this is where we got to last time in terms of the verses. If we think about this, or if we just think of dependent arising, we can overcome samsara through understanding dependent arising, in the sense that we come to understand emptiness, and if we understand emptiness, then we can overcome samsara. Therefore, it's that, so emptiness or dependent arising, it is that which protects us from samsara. It is in dependence on understanding emptiness that we place our hopes for freedom. The hopes for freedom lie within our mother. Indirectly through, of course, then through dependent arising, we come to understand it. Why? Because we need to eliminate self-grasping. So this, especially this subtle understanding, so the subtle dependent arising, that helps us to understand emptiness. But actually the subtlest type of dependent arising can only be understood once we've understood emptiness. So emptiness actually needs to be understood first before we can understand the subtlest level of dependent arising. Therefore, the path to really overcome samsara, the main path is to meditate on emptiness. So really, that's the only way we can liberate ourselves from samsara. And there were a few scriptures that Rinpoche cited. So these quotes that Rinpoche previously gave, unless we realize emptiness, there's no way we can overcome samsara, we can overcome our situation. So no need to talk about this again. So Rinpoche gave a lot of quotations, or cited quite a few quotations that were self-explanatory, just saying again and again, we need to, for the Sangha, in order to attain. So here Rinpoche gives another quote. So without understanding emptiness, there's no way. If we don't rely on emptiness, we won't be able to attain liberation, and we won't be able to attain the state of a Buddha. It's very clear. And we have so many afflictive emotions, we will continue to be immersed in them. So we have to think of the meaning of that. How is the mind that realizes emptiness, how is that the main cause of attaining liberation or enlightenment? This we need to understand. If we don't have that mind, we won't be able to attain these states. This we need to really comprehend. And of course, here we talk not just about the mind realizing emptiness, but also renunciation, and of course also bodhicitta and all the other minds that are part of, or the states of mind that are part of the method aspects, love, compassion, and of course also the increase of the strengthening of bodhicitta, the different divisions of bodhicitta, and so forth. So there's so many different states of mind that are part of the method. But actually, bodhicitta is the main method aspect, and then mind realizing emptiness is the main aspect with regard to wisdom. So really, it is understanding emptiness. What is the main obstacle? What is the main obstruction to attaining the state of a Buddha? It is cognitive obscurations. So what are these obscurations? They are the imprints that were left by self-grasping. And in order to purify them, to clean those, to cleanse our mind from these obscurations, we need to realize emptiness. So if you, for instance, think of cleaning something, if you clean like a cleaning cloth or whatever, taking as an example, some cleaning device, well, that is the analogy for the mind realizing emptiness. And then what helps this cleaning device? Well, it is bodhicitta. It's the other kind of states of mind that are part of the aspect, they're part of the method. So we need to understand this. This is important for us to really understand. If we don't understand this, we won't be able to practice appropriately. Therefore, if we really reflect on this, and what I said also previously, when she says, better to explain you the meaning first. So when we say the mind realizing emptiness, so it's that which really eliminates what's in the way to attaining liberation. in particular, the union of calm abiding and special insight that realizes emptiness. That is like realizing, that's the mind that realizes the mother. And that leads us to the state of liberation. Without that mind, we won't reach liberation. With it, we will. Therefore, it all comes down to that. Therefore, what is the root of samsara? It is the self-grasping mind. Therefore, we need the opposite. We need a mind that is the opposite to this mind, that works as an opposing force to the self-grasping mind. If the root of samsara is self-grasping, so if we think about it, so how are we reborn in samsara? So again and again, without any control, we're reborn in samsara as human, as animal, or as celestial being. So all the 6 types of existence. So it's very clear that there are certain causes that give rise to that. So there are positive causes, negative causes, positive causes leading to higher rebirth, negative causes to lower rebirth, and so forth. And so these are karmic actions, positive and negative ones. And it's clear that they arise from the afflictive emotions. So therefore, from anger, for instance, they're negative, they lead to negative karma. It's difficult to accumulate positive karma out of anger or arrogance and so forth. So mainly it's attachment. Attachment can actually lead to creating also positive types of karma, beneficial karma. So if you're attached to someone, we accumulate that just action, we may benefit someone. Anyway, the point is that certain afflictive emotions that give rise to contaminated karmic actions, whether positive or negative. Therefore, for any kind of result we experience right now, all of those results, all these experiences we have, they depend on certain karmic actions. And these karmic actions in turn have their cause, or they are caused by afflictive emotions. And the root of those afflictive emotions is self-grasping. So if you think about this, you gain some coarse understanding of how attachment arises. So for instance, I want this, I want to get all the benefit, I want to have this and that and so forth. So there's always this self-centeredness, always this sense of me, somewhat of I. It's either someone benefits me or that which is mine benefits my family, benefits my relatives, my loved ones and so forth. So it's attachments, out of attachment, focusing on the I, focusing on me, on what's mine. And so with regard to right now, with regard to the future, we're always concerned with the I and that which is mine. And that is this force, the motivating force. It doesn't matter which afflictive emotion, whether it's arrogance or attachment, there's always I, there's always the basis of I. Whatever there is, whether it's something positive or negative, whatever actions we engage in, there's always the I somehow involved. So therefore, of course, it's clear. It's very clear it comes from the I, and then the sense something is positive or negative, which then gives rise to attachment and aversion. And it's really that we don't, it's not that, it's only we perceive something pleasant or unpleasant. From there, all the other afflictive emotions arise. It's impossible that another person sees something pleasant and we become angry or we become attached. It doesn't work like that. It's our mind perceiving something pleasant or unpleasant that leads to attachment and or aversion. And so if other people like see something unpleasant and we would get angry, well, then we would always be angry because there are always people seeing something, perceiving something unpleasant. And so if another person sees something pleasant, we don't necessarily accumulate attachment. Also, if another person has something pleasant, experiences pleasure, well, because the I is not involved, therefore there's no sense of attachment. It's always to do with me and mine. Anything pleasant that happens to me or happens or unpleasant, that is always related back to the mind, and then we react accordingly with attachment or aversion. So where does that come from, that self-centeredness? It comes from self-grasping. And it becomes clear if we think about it, we have to reflect on it more, but get a sense that there's self-grasping, that the self-grasping is really responsible for self-centeredness. And we don't really analyze the existence of the self. We just allow these appearances and we just follow those appearances. So of course we talk about appearances as in like you meet someone, a person is coming, a person is going. So just from the point of view of just these appearances, we talk about conventional existence, but when we don't talk about this, when we analyze deeper, what is the I? We really check, where's that I? Just on a conventional basis, yes, it appears, but if we really check, where's the I? Where's that thing we call the me, or the self? It seems as if there was something very concrete there. From the point of view of just the appearance, well, just seeing, it always seems like there's something very, very, very precise, something very solid, as if there was something within me. Like if I were to kind of take apart mind and body, if I were to kind of cut it apart in a form of surgery, as if I could take out this I could kind of extract this I. That's my feeling. That's the appearance to my mind if I don't analyze. And that this sense of an I, that then gives rise to attachment, to aversion, and so forth. This sense of something very concrete. So if you check your own mind, like how you have a sense of this solid, concrete I, well, if you recognize that, then you recognize how it gives rise to the other afflictive emotions. So give an example. So yesterday also Rinpoche gave some examples. If you take, for instance, this piece of paper. So this is white. So if I were to write something on it and were to put it in a place that's dark, in a kind of dark place, if I were to just leave it there, they may think there's a dollar. There's a, like if I were to make a drawing, it looked like for instance, a dollar note. Someone may think, oh, there's a dollar note. There's actually money lying there. So they may think, oh, there's actual money there. So there's a sense, it's not just I'm labeling it, but what happens in that moment, you're just labeling dollars on this piece of paper with a certain writing on it. So I'm just, she says, I'm talking about like if it mistakenly appears to you as if there was money, it seems as if from the side of this piece of paper, there's really money there. There's a certain value there. There's money there. That's how it appears. Actually, it's not really, it's not dollars. It's not money, but it appears that way, as if really from the side of this object, from the side of this paper, there's this money. And based on that, attachment towards this money arises. But if we understand, we see this as money. If we understand it's just a mistaken appearance, it's not actuality. So believing this is really money, I mean, this belief will be reversed, will not arise. Actually, we understand it's not money at all. So if we just take that example, based on that example, we can come to understand then that there's no attachment and no anger with regard to anger, for instance. So we understand that there is no actual money. As long as we hold on to it being money, then we will have attachment. But if we understand, oh, this is just a mistaken appearance, it's just a piece of paper, then this attachment doesn't arise. So this is just the example. You're just saying phenomena just appear to us. In actuality, there's nothing concrete there. Therefore, attachment cannot arise. So this is in actuality, if we just take any objects, if we didn't perceive something really concrete and solid there, these afflictive emotions such as attachment and aversion couldn't arise. Now, what does that mean? What does that show? What does that indicate? Well, self-grasping is the root of all other afflictive emotions, and they then give rise to our existence within samsara. So therefore, samsara happens because of the self-grasping, which is the root. We can really come to understand that this is our root. If we understand the root of all our trouble is self-grasping, then we understand, well, the only way to overcome this self-grasping is the wisdom realizing selflessness. Once we understand that, then it really makes sense. But for that, in order to generate that kind of wisdom, we need to understand what selflessness means and how this understanding of selflessness can overcome this root of samsara, and how it can overcome cyclic existence, how it can help us to be liberated from it. So once we understand that, once we understand what is the root of samsara and so forth, we also come to understand that it's only It's only an understanding of selflessness that can help us to overcome samsara, and that really the union of calm abiding and special insight, realizing emptiness, that's the real antidote to all our troubles. So when we talk about self-grasping being the root of samsara, that's well known. There's no Buddhist who wouldn't say that it's self-grasping that is the root of all our trouble. But saying that, well, with regard to self-grasping, so for instance, Asanga and Vasubandhu, what do they say, for instance? They speak of something like self-grasping. Actually, how does self-grasping arise? From not seeing selflessness. So they place this kind of ignorance even before self-grasping. Here we're not talking about not able to see past and future life, for instance. No, it's saying like there's some kind of ignorance that's the underlying cause that gives rise to self-grasping, like a not seeing of selflessness. Therefore, it's a kind of ignorance, it's a kind of mental darkness with regard to selflessness. So we all have this kind of ignorance, we all have this kind of mental darkness. And from that mental darkness, Asanga and Vasubandhu would say, arises self-grasping. It's a slightly different view. It's not incorrect as such, it's just a different way of explaining this. But Chandrakirti and Dharmakirti, so not seeing selflessness. So anyway, so they explain it slightly different. So it's basically what Asanga and what they say. So Chandrakirti, for instance, wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say this mere mental darkness gives rise to self-grasping. They wouldn't explain that. Why is this important? Well, that which gives rise to the other afflictive emotions, it is self-grasping. It's definitely self-grasping that gives rise to attachment and anger and so forth. That's the main cause. It's a mind that apprehends something, it grasps something, it apprehends, it believes that there's a real self there from its own side. So it's an apprehending, a grasping mind. But a mind that doesn't perceive, that's just a mental darkness, it doesn't apprehend anything. So what Vasubandhu and Asanga are saying, there's just this mere mental darkness of not seeing. So it's not an apprehending mind. There's a difference there. There's a difference there when Asanga and Vasubandhu say that this mere mental darkness of not perceiving something, of not perceiving reality is the root cause. Well, it's not really apprehending anything, which is different to what Chandrakirti says, where he says, who says that there is really something grasping. There's a grasping mind. That's the difference between these two systems. Chandrakirti on one hand and Asanga and Vasubandhu on the other hand. So for instance, giving you an example, if there's a mind, there's no past and future lives. If you apprehend the non-existence of past and future life. So based on that, you can do something about this. So basically, if you have this wrong view, then you will act in whichever way you like because you believe there's no next life. So that's the wrong view you have. So this mind that grasps at the non-existence of reincarnation. And based on that, then that gives rise to all sorts of negative actions because there's a feeling, oh, my actions don't have consequence. But then there's another mind that just doesn't perceive past and future lives. It's just mentally, there's this mental darkness, this kind of ignorance in the sense of not perceiving the existence of past and future lives. That kind of mind of just not perceiving doesn't give rise to this same strength of negative actions. Therefore, Rinpoche says it's important to understand that just that ignorance of not understanding selflessness, as Asanga and like Dharmakirti, actually Rinpoche now says Dharmakirti as well as Vasubandhu, they would say that's just that mere ignorance, that not understanding. That is not okay, because Chandrakirti would argue that's not enough to have the strong attachment. That must just grasping, that must be the main cause. Anyway, it's important to understand what selflessness refers to and how this self-grasping mind is a mistaken mind. That's what we really need to think about. That's what we need to reflect on. Anyway, with regard to the text, yesterday we got that there were some verses from different texts. So yesterday, but last time Rinpoche talked about Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way. So there are actually three folds if we don't understand emptiness. We need emptiness. Without emptiness, we cannot liberate ourselves. So there are three folds if we don't understand emptiness. Chandrakirti spoke about this. So there are these three folds. What are these three folds? So in the 10 ground, in the 10 Bhumi Sutra, the Buddha said, so a bodhisattva on the 7th ground, a bodhisattva on the 7th ground outweighs or outshines, a bodhisattva on the 7th ground outshines a bodhisattva on the outshines a bodhisattva from the point of view of wisdom. So this is what it says at the beginning. What does it say this? What does that mean? If a bodhisattva on the 7th ground outweighs or outshines the wisdom of a Shravaka, for instance, what does that mean? That shows that a Shravaka, a Hira or solitary realizer, they realize emptiness in order to overcome samsara. If for instance, a Shravaka Arhat, a self-liberated Shravaka didn't have the wisdom realizing selflessness, then a bodhisattva on the 1st ground would also outshine a bodhisattva, would also outshine a person who's attained liberation, so a Shravaka Arhat, for instance. So because on the 1st ground, realizing selflessness directly, a bodhisattva would therefore outshine, of course, would be much greater than an Arhat. But here in the text, in the entry into the middle way, it says on the 7th ground. So actually, when you realize emptiness directly, so when you reach the path of seeing, then you attain the 1st ground, the 1st bhumi. So you have this incredible wisdom, actually, but you don't outshine an arhat. You don't outshine a person who's attained self-liberation because they also have the wisdom realizing selflessness. So it becomes clear from Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way that he says on the 7th ground, a bodhisattva outshines or is greater than an arhat with regard to one's wisdom. Why? Because the reason being on the 7th ground, in the 7th bhumi, one attains a wisdom, a special kind of wisdom as a bodhisattva, an uncommon kind of wisdom. What is this? That it's a kind of wisdom that enables the bodhisattva within a smallest moment of time to engage, to enter into the absorption of emptiness and then rise again out of it in a very short time. So with regard to this very brief entering into an absorption and coming out of it again, on the 7th ground, a bodhisattva is able to do that, but an arhat is not able to do that. So on the 7th, below the 7th ground, so the 1st to the 6th ground, the wisdom is pretty equal of a bodhisattva and an arhat, someone who's attained self-liberation. Therefore, it's on the 7th ground that we say it's superior. The wisdom of a bodhisattva is superior. For instance, a Shravaka or a Pratyeka Buddha may attain different types of meditative concentrations and eliminate that which is in the way to attaining these different states. So for instance, the peak of cyclic existence. So these different concentrations, so with regard to the different types of afflictive emotions that are associated with the 3 realms of existence, so they are able, so therefore, and the argument of the Prasangika school is that if they were to just attain these different concentrations, they could overcome the afflictive emotions just temporarily. But if they didn't realize emptiness, they couldn't overcome all the afflictive emotions. They would not be able to attain liberation. So in the other tenet systems, the other philosophical schools, they don't accept that. They don't say that a Shravaka or a Pratyeka Buddha, in order to attain self-liberation, has to realize emptiness. It's only the Prasangika school that says that. But Chandrakirti's argument would be that if an arhat hadn't realized emptiness directly, then an arhat would have just temporarily removed afflictive emotions associated with the different concentrations that they have attained. They could temporarily reduce them, or they would temporarily not arise, but they could not totally eliminate them. That would be the fault in the Prasangika school, according to the Prasangika school. Therefore, without realizing emptiness, so the Prasangika school would say, like, unless you realize emptiness, you can't realize selflessness, and unless you realize selflessness, you can't realize emptiness. So there's no difference. The reason being, as long as you hold on to the phenomena around you existing from their own side, well, for that long you have the grasping at the self of phenomena. So in order to really overcome self-grasping, you need to overcome any type of self-grasping, also with regard to phenomena, which means you have to realize selflessness of phenomena and the self phenomena. So the selfness of the I and the selfness of phenomena other than the I. That's what also Nagarjuna says in his Ratnavali, when he says, as long as you have grasping at phenomena, you have grasping at the I, and so forth. So in this particular verse, he's saying you need to realize the selflessness, the emptiness of all phenomena, understanding that the I doesn't exist inherently. So without understanding that the aggregates don't exist inherently, if you don't understand that they don't exist that way, you can't realize that the I doesn't exist inherently. So you have to understand that the I doesn't exist from its own side, that there's nothing, there's no inherent existence, there's nothing to be found. And unless you realize that even the aggregates lack inherent existence, it's impossible to come to the conclusion that the I doesn't exist inherently. So unless you totally negate any kind of sense of an I, unless you do that, you won't be able to overcome that self-grasping. So it's really, once you really understand the final nature of the I, then you also realize how other phenomena exist and vice versa. Which is why if, for instance, as some of the other philosophical schools would say, they would say that an arhat hasn't realized selfness of phenomena, but then the Prasangika would argue, well, if the arhat doesn't realize that, then he doesn't realize selflessness, and if he doesn't realize selflessness, he can't eliminate afflictive emotions. So that's the argument of Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti says, therefore, in order to really understand selflessness, you have to understand emptiness. It's the same. If you don't realize emptiness, you can't eliminate the afflictive emotions. The other philosophical systems would disagree with that, but the Prasangika school says specifically it's the same. Whether you talk about selflessness or emptiness, it's the same realization. So I'm not sure this is clear. It's not okay. It's okay if it's not clear, but that explanation is really important. Therefore, it's really essential to understand that the view of emptiness, that in itself is possible to eliminate, that the only way to eliminate samsara is the mind realizing emptiness. So there not being a difference between emptiness, selflessness. So here, that's what it says in verse 4. It is ultimately in your kindness alone, O Mother, that my hopes for freedom lie. And then, of course, there's the aspect of method that is also important. And then verse 5. So the duality of subjects and objects. So there are all these different objects outside, external objects, internal minds, and so forth. So they appear in a certain way to us. So with regard, so if they do they exist, it seems like this seems that they appear to us. They appear to us in a way as if they existed as something positive from their own side, but they don't exist in that way. They don't exist like from their own side as something positive or negative. So this, if they really existed in that way, as if phenomena were inherently positive or inherently negative, if that appearance were in accordance with reality, if phenomena existed in and of themselves as this, that, and the other, if that was correct, then it would always be positive. It would be positive for anyone if that appearance was correct. Then it wouldn't help. Then the Buddhas wouldn't be able to help us. Nothing would change. Things couldn't change if phenomena existed in and of themselves. There would always be positive, always be negative. Then we wouldn't be able to eliminate the cause of all our problems. There wouldn't be any method. There would be no means to overcome the causes of suffering. Therefore, if the phenomena existed the way they existed, there wouldn't be any liberation. But that's not the case. That's what it says here. If the duality of subject and object is as it seems to be, then not even the Buddhas of the three times can save us. But how can they save us? They can't save us. So it's really like if they were to exist that way, then the Buddhas of the three times couldn't save us. But this ever-shifting spectacle is in truth might change his mother's expressions. So the different changes that causes give rise to effects, etc. And so results, they're dependent on causes. So as long as you have accumulated if there are certain causes, then you can have a certain result. Therefore, change depends on this change of causes giving rise to results and so forth. And then if you talk about the four seasons, for example, summer, autumn, and so forth. So all these different changes, the reason that there are the changes of the four seasons, it's all depends on certain causes and conditions. And that's here, it's like by changeless mother's expression. So if phenomena didn't lack inherent existence, that wouldn't be possible. So emptiness is really just emptiness itself is permanent. It's just the absence of inherent existence. So therefore we say that these changes are only possible because of the permanent mother, because of emptiness. So all these different changes around us, they're all in the nature of emptiness. Within emptiness, they exist within emptiness or in the state of emptiness. If they didn't lack inherent existence, they couldn't exist. Therefore, what does it mean? Phenomena are not existing in and of themselves. They don't exist inherently. So that's the nature. Of course, it's only their final nature, because they still appear, phenomena still appear to us. Although that's their final nature, still phenomena appear to us. But that's just because they're labeled. So they're not permanent. They're not permanent. These appearances are not permanent. They're changing all the time. They're always changing, these appearances. But their final nature, they can change because their final nature is emptiness. So being empty, lacking inherent existence, they can appear. All these phenomena, they appear to us, they exist in that way just because they're empty. They appear to us only because they lack inherent existence. So they're like a magical illusion, and they're an expression of our mother. So that's the final nature. So it's almost like behind their appearances, there's the final nature of emptiness. So it's just temporarily that there are these phenomena appearing, but that's not their final nature. Their final nature is the mother. The final nature is emptiness. So these temporary appearances, they arise from this emptiness. They're an expression of emptiness, if you like. So this is what it says here. And that's why we can attain liberation, because the final nature of phenomena is that lack of inherent existence. Hence, there's an indeed a way out. Yeah, so that's why it says here that this ever-shifting spectacle is in truth my changeless mother's expression. Then verse 6. This inexpressible mother of mine, not existing in any form, appears in all forms, and this mutual dependence of emptiness and form alone is an important lesson indeed. So the meaning of that verse is, when we speak of emptiness and dependent arising, they depend on each other. So in dependence on emptiness, you understand dependent arising, and in dependence on understanding dependent arising, you understand emptiness. So they assist each other in terms of one's understanding. That being the case, so not only are they not contradictory, dependent arising and emptiness, but they also assist each other in the sense that the more you can you reflect upon dependent arising, the better you come to understand emptiness. This is something that comes every hour, which is computing. So the more you reflect on dependent arising, the better your understanding of emptiness becomes. So it improves. Your reflection on dependent arising will improve your understanding of emptiness. And likewise, the more you reflect on emptiness, the more you reflect on that reflection will increase your understanding of dependent arising. So they help each other. So when we hear, a lot of people, when we hear emptiness, just empty, when we hear empty or emptiness, it seems from the point of view of the words just being empty, it seems to be contradictory to the words dependent arising. So empty means empty, there's nothing there. And when you say dependent arising, it seems just if you take it literally, it seems there's a contradiction, just from a literal sense. And also if you think of the meaning, so there's nothing inherently there, there's nothing there, there's a sense there's nothing there at all. So there's nothing to point at. And if then you say it exists, independence on causes and conditions, so that certain causes give rise to certain results, for instance, that's not the understanding you get. And in general, if you hear it doesn't exist inherently, the sense that there's dependent arising doesn't arise to your mind. But actually, if we think of emptiness, we understand dependent arising better. And if we understand dependent arising better, we understand emptiness better. So, and this is actually just something that the Prasangika school explains. The lower schools talk about just emptiness. Anyway, they don't talk of the lack of inherent existence. For them, lack of inherent existence and non-existence is the same. So if you say there's nothing to be found, the lower systems, other than the Prasangika school, will say there's nothing existent. If there's nothing there that you can point at that is the essence of something, well, then it couldn't exist. That's the view of the non-Prasangika schools. So all the philosophical schools except for the Prasangika school are not able to posit something as existent unless it exists inherently. So all the other schools, Vaibhashika, Satantrika, Chittamatra, and Svatantrika Madhyamika, they say non-existent and lack of inherent existence are equivalent. That's the view of these lower schools. Therefore, for them, it's very difficult to get a sense of dependent arising. But the Prasangika schools say that non-existent and lack of inherent existence are not the same. Lack of inherent existence means means that something exists. If it lacks inherent existence, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all. It means it does exist, it can exist. That's the difference between the lower schools and the Prasangika. So when we say they assist each other, that's the meaning here. When we say phenomena don't exist inherently, we can come to understand that they exist, that they exist in dependence. And likewise, when we hear dependent arising, we understand that. We can come to understand that phenomena do not exist inherently. So we need to really think about this. It takes time to really train ourselves to gain a deeper and deeper understanding, so that the power of our wisdom is so strong that we really come to understand this. Right now, it's just words. We just use words. It seems like this is what this refers to, but we don't really understand the meaning. We don't really understand what this refers to. So it's difficult at this stage. So it's important to really think of the meaning, and it's difficult for us really to catch the meaning of these words like lack of inherent existence and dependent arising. So there's this so there's a quote that His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives again and again. It reads, when the analysis of the view is thoroughly complete through the mere dawning of the appearance of their objects, the mental consciousness and the sense consciousnesses induce indefinite knowledge, ascertaining their objects to be empty without relying upon reasonings or facts, and so forth. So phenomena appear. So just because of the appearances, we see things. This appearance of the objects. So just from the appearance of objects, we can come to understand that they lack inherent existence, that these phenomena that appear from that. So from the appearance that is dependent arising, we can come to understand that phenomena don't exist inherently. So here, this scholar, Adept Nosang Gyatso, he gives an example. So for instance, we all know that there are no two moons in the sky, that there's only one moon. So for someone who knows that there's only one moon, so if this person has some kind of fold in their eye, and they may have the appearance of two moons, they know, although the appearance of two moons arises, they know this is mistaken. So because of the appearance of two moons, that gives rise to their understanding that there can only be one moon, because they're so familiar with this. This is the example that Nosang Gyatso gives here. So a person who knows, of course, knowing that there are no two moons. So a person who doesn't know. So if you, for instance, press your eye and you suddenly see two moons, if you just press your eyeball, you actually start seeing things in a way that two moons appear. So just when you see these two moons, you know that they're not two. So just that seeing of those two moons, that gives rise to understanding, oh, there's only one. Therefore, just seeing something, just the appearance of the two moons in this case, or in the case of what the example is explaining, or what the example is for here, using dependent arising and emptiness here, and not the example of the two moons. So when there's an appearance of, there's just the appearance, if you really understand dependent arising, you understand they're just appearances, they don't exist from their own side. Now talking about phenomena not existing from their own side, that means phenomena, if they don't exist from their own side, they can only be imputed, they can only be labeled. If they don't exist objectively, so they have to exist. If they don't exist objectively, but they do exist, they do exist. So if they don't exist at all, then that would not make sense. There wouldn't be anything. There wouldn't be any problems. There wouldn't be any happiness. There wouldn't be any suffering. So that doesn't make sense. If there was nothing there, that would be so absurd. It'd be totally absurd if we said there's nothing there. So there would be no food. There would not be me. There would not be you. It wouldn't make sense. That's too absurd. That's extremely absurd. It's the extreme of nihilism. So again, extremely extreme view of nihilism, that there's nothing there. So being there, phenomena do exist, but since they don't exist objectively from their own side, then the only other possibility, the only other option would be that they're labeled, that they're posited by the mind. That's the only way they could exist. So they could only be labeled, they could only be imputed. And that is really what dependent arising on its subtlest level refers to, phenomena being just labeled. So the person who enjoys things, who utilizes things, these things are just appearing to the mind. They don't exist from the side of the objects. They do exist. And we can know this from our own experience, that they do exist. So when we say we're not hungry, of course, we can't deny that we get hungry. If we don't eat food, we get hungry. So we can deny this as much as we want. We will hungry. We will experience hunger. There's no suffering. If we say there's no suffering, if someone hits us in the face, well, there be pain. If someone slaps us in the face, there'll be suffering. So there were definitely an experience of suffering. It's impossible to say it's not there. I mean, to deny the existence of things. But if it doesn't exist from the side of the object, if we look from the side of the object, we'll look for something, some essence there. And if we don't find it, the only other option we're left with is saying it's merely labeled. It's a mere appearance to the mind. It's just labeled. It's just imputed. It's just designated. Therefore, saying that it doesn't exist inherently, we can understand both, that it doesn't exist from its own side and it's dependent on So for instance, Lama Tsongkhapa says this. So whatever, all phenomena, for instance, the flowers and books and so forth, they all exist. They do exist. But the way in which they exist, there are only two ways in which they can exist. Either they exist from their own side, or they exist from the side of the mind, as in like being merely labeled. If they existed from their own side, that would stand in contradiction to logical reasoning. It would be absurd. Therefore, it doesn't make sense. It's in contradiction to logic. Therefore, there's no other option. If there's two ways in which things exist, and one way is being imputed, as being negated, then it can only be that phenomena can, if they don't exist from their own side, they exist from the side of the mind. They exist subjectively. That's the only way. Therefore, they can only exist in dependence on, in reliance on consciousness, as in appearing to the mind, being labeled by the mind. There's no other way in which they exist. So this is what Lama Tsongkhapa, for instance, talks about, what he says. Therefore, it's a little easier to understand that independent arising gives rise to an understanding. Understanding of dependent arising gives rise to an understanding of emptiness. Well, that's a little easier to understand in the sense if phenomena are dependent on other things, they can't exist in and of themselves independently. So, for instance, if something is a result, it depends on other causes and conditions, and all the other Buddhist philosophers and just ordinary people would agree with that. So that a result is dependent on causes and conditions. So it's not hard to understand that, but not just that, a phenomena being dependent on other things. So dependent on something. We can also not just say that the result depends on a cause, but a cause also depends on a result. So we all say that the result depends on its cause, but on a subtler level, we talk about also the cause being dependent on its result. So in that sense, we can say something is dependent on something else. It doesn't exist independently. It doesn't exist inherently. So being being dependently arisen, being posited in dependence on something, that means it can't exist independently. Anyway, so we come to understand that therefore independence on that dependent arising, that gives rise to understanding of emptiness. and then an understanding of. So when we say depending on something else, so for instance, taking one phenomenon, so this piece of paper, for example, so how is this a piece of paper? How come we call this paper? So we explain. We can only explain that this is paper in dependence on other phenomena. So how do we explain this? We have to use something else. We have to use other ideas to then explain this is paper. We can't just say it's paper because it's paper, because it's paper. That doesn't make it clearer. So being paper, we need other phenomena. In dependence on other phenomena, we can explain that this is a piece of paper. So other phenomena can illustrate or can indicate that this is a piece of paper. This is a piece of paper. Why? Why is it a piece of paper? Because you can write on it. You can write on this. And when you ignite it, it'll burn easily. So you can easily burn it. And if you want to wrap something up, I think Rinpoche. Or if you take other things, you can actually make out of this material, you can make paper, for instance. So whenever you talk about paper, you need to talk about other things in relation to it in order to explain what paper is. This shows that it doesn't exist in and of itself. You can't just talk of paper to understand what paper is. You need other aspects. And that shows that it doesn't exist in and of itself. You need other phenomena for it to exist, for it to explain it, and so forth. So that's one way to look at it. And something what I talked about before. And this is also one of the best examples. It's also explained in the Ratnavali. And it's also easily understood. That's just an example. It's just an example. That in itself is not enough. So to get the full meaning, you need more. But these are just examples to exemplify this. And it will be beneficial. Is this long or short? Rinpoche shows you his pen. Is it long or short? You can't say. You can't say just it's short or long. You have to take something else. So if you take this mala, this rosary, so which one is longer, which is shorter? You can, if you compare those two. So it's always in relation to something else that you can say this pen is long or short. So it's always in support of, so you kind of lean against something else, in dependence on something else. You can talk about its size. So this is true for all phenomena like that. Our mind also is like that. It's always dependent on other phenomena. Therefore, we can come to understand that those two aspects assist each other, dependent arising as well as emptiness. That's the main meaning. So in verse 6, this inexpressible mother of mind, not existing in any form, appears in all forms. In this mutual dependence of emptiness and form alone is an important lesson indeed. So all phenomena lack inherent existence. So that's like our mother. Their nature is emptiness. But all sorts of distance phenomena appears in all sorts of forms. So here the word is like to appear in all sorts of forms. So these different phenomena that appear to us, all these phenomena, how do they are dependent, in mutual dependence of something depending on something else, and that other depending on itself. So back and forth, there's this mutual dependence. So for instance, physicists talk about this, like quantum physicists, I mean, the subtle atoms. So they talk about very subtle particles, quarks, and then other aspects that are even subtler than quarks and so forth. So all these different particles, so what it actually is, how it manifests, how these quarks and so forth, how they manifest, is dependent on the observer. Without an observer, then the particles wouldn't manifest in the way in which they do. So all these different appearances, all depending on the observer. Therefore, that also shows that whatever phenomenon there exists, phenomena are mutually dependent. There's a mutual dependence. And just that means that they lack, that they're empty, they're nature of emptiness. Just that means that is the nature of emptiness. Just that dependent arising. His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There's a book, Atoms, the whole world in one atom. There's this book by His Holiness, the universe in a single atom. Oh, there's this, that text. In that text, His Holiness talks about this mutual dependence, like using a chair and a house. So we have a sense that this chair, so a room and a chair. So we have a sense there's this chair that's in and of itself a chair. So its parts, etc. But actually we need also an environment in which you can put this chair. So you need someone to sit on it. So certain parts, you need a place, you need a certain environment in which a chair exists. So the chair cannot exist in and of itself unless it was used in a certain way to have that function, etc. Therefore, this Holiness gives in this book, The Universe in a Single Atom, talks about this interdependence, that phenomena depend on each other. This is the example this Holiness gives. So we need to understand this. Here, really, what does it mean? Really, it says in verse 6, it's just alone is an important lesson. This mutual dependence alone is an important lesson. Therefore, here we talk about the mother as emptiness, also the inexpressible mother. So just using words is not sufficient. It seems to be, so emptiness here is inexpressible because when we just hear those words, it seems contradictory. We have to, of course, explain emptiness. We're trying to explain emptiness here. So what is the nature of phenomena? Phenomena lack inherent existence. Their nature, they're in the nature of the lack of existence from their own side and so forth. So when we introduce emptiness, we need to talk about emptiness. We need to use words, but we say that's inexpressible. That's actually a contradiction in itself. It's inexpressible while we express it. But actually emptiness is inexpressible. Sometimes we say it's inconceivable. And on the other hand, we talk about it like applying certain reasonings. Or Chandrakirti in his 6th chapter, at the end of the 6th chapter, he says that whatever Nagarjuna has said, I have taught here. So on one hand, Chandrakirti himself says you can talk about it. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, for instance, that the Buddha was the greatest speaker. He was the superior speaker. Why? Because he taught the greatest ideas, or he taught dependent arising, because he taught dependent arising. So he was this, well, he spoke therefore also about emptiness. So it seems you can express emptiness because we praise the Buddha for having taught it, but there's no contradiction saying on one hand it is expressible and non-expressible. What does it mean to be inexpressible? So it says in the place of reasoning, for instance, by Baba Viveka, it says, for instance, she says, I thought this quote was in here somewhere. Oh, it says this: if emptiness is inexpressible, so the words it means that the words cannot express emptiness. So if the words cannot express emptiness, then It seems to be in contradiction to everyone talking about emptiness. So it's inexpressible, it's inconceivable, and it's beyond thought, yeah, it's beyond conception. So yeah, inconceivable. So emptiness is inconceivable, it is inexpressible. So that means you cannot you cannot understand it. And so here the argument would be, well, then why did Nagarjuna talk about it? It's inexpressible. Why did he talk about it? How did he write about it? So that's a contradictory. And Baba Viveka says, no, there's no contradiction. Here, inexpressible means, and being we can express it. You can express something. What does that mean? So for someone to realize emptiness directly, so there's this mind is free from duality, so non-dual mind, when you realize emptiness directly. So the way you experience the experience of emptiness in that moment, when you realize emptiness directly, you cannot convey really what you perceive. That's what it means. It's inexpressible, in that your experience of emptiness at that moment cannot be put into words. Therefore, when you realize exactly the way you realize emptiness, the person realizes emptiness directly, so exactly that way cannot be put into words. That's what it really means. Therefore, words fall short in terms of indicating that experience, and that in terms of expressing that experience. So this refers to the direct experience of emptiness. And we're not able to, if we have this direct experience, we're unable to express emptiness in the way in which we experience it with that wisdom. That's what it means. It is inexpressible. So Rinpoche just kind of repeats it. This refers to direct perception. So for instance, if we take something sweet, we eat something sweet. So this taste that we experience without direct perception, that is this tongue consciousness, we can of course explain to a certain degree, but exactly the way we experience that exact experience of something sweet. So without any doubt, we cannot 100% express this experience. We cannot share it with someone, convey with our own words exactly this is how it tastes. Can this person really come to understand our experience? No. So what we experience, that we have in that moment, only if the other person has a direct experience of something sweet, then they have an understanding. But we can kind of convey in a very limited way. We can use words. It's not bitter, it's not salty, it's not, so to express what it means to be sweet, or the sweetness of a particular candy or whatever that you actually taste with your tongue consciousness. So this is what it means. Therefore, emptiness cannot be expressed exactly the way it is directly experienced. That's the meaning of inexpressible when we hear that. So that was verse 6. So verse 7, not finding my father when sought is in fact finding my mother. My father is found in my mother's lap. That's how these kind parents save their child, I'm told. So here, this is again this dependence on each other. So how do we come to understand emptiness? How do we find emptiness? How do we come to understand? When we look for something, what we find is this unfindability. So with regard to all these different objects, so all these phenomena, they appear around us. If we analyze them, if we check, so we need to analyze, we need to investigate, how do they exist? So when we investigate, when we analyze, there's nothing to be found. This is the essence of this object. We don't find something. So this unfindability, that unfindability itself, that is what we find. So what we find is this unfindability. That's the mother. Therefore, these different aspects forms, physical forms and so forth, when we analyze what is this object, when we really investigate and analyze what is this vase, for instance, taking the example of the vase, what is the vase within the vase, and we really look for some essence, is it this, is it that, and so forth, we don't find an essence of the Buddha. So an unfindability of the vase. So what is the unfindability of the vase? That is the mother, that is the emptiness of the vase. So here, analyzing, not finding my father, not finding the object we are searching, is in fact finding my mother. So therefore, when you analyze, when you engage in this analysis or investigation, you find emptiness. What you find is the emptiness, that is the non-findability. But my father's found in my mother's lap. That's how these kind parents save their child. But so although I cannot find something when I analyze, when you don't find anything, although that being the case, but nonetheless, which means that it doesn't exist inherently. So we come to understand when we don't find something, we know it doesn't exist inherently. But from within, but what we need to find is from within this emptiness, we need to understand its dependent arising. So it is, we should be able to posit, and so this is what it says in the Heart Sutra, form is empty, emptiness is form. So from within emptiness, still appearances are possible. So here what that means is we need to understand that phenomena, although they lack inherent existence, they exist dependently. Although empty, they exist in dependence. Therefore, here we say it's in the mother's lap, it's within the mother's lap. So within its emptiness, we can still find it. It still exists conventionally. Therefore, the appearance of dependent arising and its existence of emptiness, those are not contradictory. They exist in union. And in that way, these kind parents, they save us, they save their child, they save us from samsara. So she reads again, verse 7. And then verse 8. Evidently my mother's face, which is neither one nor multiple, appears ungraspably in my brother's mirror. Yet a lunatic like me had not the slightest clue. So with regard to the emptiness, it's this non-findability. So it says actually in the scriptures, it's just the not seeing is the sacred seeing. So therefore not seeing inherent existence is this pure seeing. Therefore, evidently, my mother's face is neither one nor multiple. So as previously said, when we say phenomena don't exist inherently, it says that phenomena don't exist in and of themselves. So there's form that lacks inherent existence. So having understood how phenomena don't exist, we need to understand how they do exist. How do phenomena exist? So verse 8. So what does that mean, first 2 lines? So phenomena are not inherently one or inherently other. So the vase, for instance, with regard to its parts, it's not one with its parts, and it's not totally separate from its parts. It cannot be found as being one with its part, and it cannot be found as being separate from its part. So this is what it means. It's neither a vase, something like a vase within its emptiness is neither inherently one nor different from its parts. So there's nothing. Therefore, here the mother's face means the mother's nature. So this nature of emptiness, it appears ungraspably as inherent existence in my brother's mirror. So it does exist. It doesn't exist inherently, but it exists in dependence, which is why you can, in dependence on dependent arising, you can come to understand its emptiness. So understanding Therefore, emptiness exists. How does it exist? So how does it exist? So phenomena do exist. It's a little bit difficult to understand it from these words here. But when we say empty, when we say emptiness, it exists in dependence on dependent arising. And then dependence on dependent arising, we can come to understand that things lack inherent existence. So that means that emptiness does exist. It is independent arising. It's a mere appearance. Even emptiness exists, but it doesn't exist truly. So how does it exist? So when we say emptiness, it doesn't exist truly. It's not okay to say that emptiness exists inherently. Even emptiness is merely labeled. It's also just an appearance to the mind. So when we hold on to true existence, we cannot think like the way we perceive phenomena to exist inherently. Well, emptiness doesn't exist inherently, just as vases and so forth do not exist inherently. So it may seem as if it existed in and of itself and we could actually point at it, but emptiness itself is merely labeled, it's merely designated. So it's not something precise. We cannot point at it. This is emptiness. This is something concrete and solid. There's nothing to be found. Again, therefore it says, my mother's face, which is neither one nor multiple, appears ungraspably in my brother's mirror. So within the mirror of dependent arising. So all phenomena exist in that way. So realistically, they are ungraspable as inherent existence. Yet a lunatic like me had not the slightest clue. And then verse 9. So you've talked about emptiness before. Changkya Rölpai Dorjé has talked about emptiness. So what is the meaning of emptiness? What is the view of emptiness? How can I come to that? And how do they relate dependent arising and emptiness? So a lot was explained. So how should I take this? How should I come to understand this? So this is what he says here in verse 9. Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti set their instructions upon the wind, and Manjushri Garbhu conveyed these to us by bird. So I hope to see my ever-present old mother without the hardship of a prolonged search. So Changkya Rölpai Dorjé, he says, well, there's Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. So their teachings, so these are the, so it's really here, the wind here is really the teachings of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti. And so Kachim, actually it's instructions here, it's translated as instructions, but it's really the legacy of the two. So the legacy is the instructions, is the teachings, is their writings. Nagarjuna's and Chandrakirti's instructions, or the legacy, is set up on the wind. And it's something that, so it's Manjushri Garbhu or Lama Tsongkhapa here. He conveyed these to us by bird. So using the wind. So from the instructions that Lama Tsongkhapa received from his lamas that go back in an unbroken lineage, then Manjushri Garbhu or Lama Tsongkhapa, he conveyed also the instructions by bird. So Changkya Rölpai Dorjé doesn't hope to engage in the long hardship to understand emptiness. So really what he says here, Changkya Rölpai Dorjé said he didn't have to work so hard. In actuality, all he needed was Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation. So that made it easy for him to realize or to come to understand what emptiness and dependent arising mean. And then in verse 10, there seem to be among today's scholars some caught in a web of words like thoroughly withstanding and true existence, who seek only to negate some creature with horns while leaving intact this everyday appearance of solidity. And then verse 11, Rinpoche also read in verse 11. So this is with regard to the Gelugpa tradition in the Tibetan tradition. So true existence is negated. That's true. But some people, sometimes they seem to, when it says non-inherent existence, So it's almost like a monster with horns. They don't identify the object of negation properly. So there's like a creature with horns, like a monster or something. So if you see a creature with horns, there seems to be a fear of this object of negation. So that's what they negate. But what they negate is not the actual emptiness. It's more like a monster with horns. But with regard to the phenomena that appear to us, it seems they don't really look at these objects in front of us, like their appearances. They don't really go into and understand, or don't explain, or don't think about how they really exist. It seems like this bad object of negation, like a monster. That's what they negate, but independently of all these other phenomena. So whatever appears to us, so all these phenomena appear to us as if truly existent. But this true existence here, it's with the object of negation, appears together. The object of negation, that which we should negate, appears together with everything else. So they don't really deal with that. There just seems to be a separate kind of object of negation. So if we just leave that, the way phenomena appear to us, if we don't really deal with the self-grasping mind and have a sense there is some permanent, true existence, thoroughly withstanding, over there, like a horn, like a creature with horns. If then we debate and engage in analysis and so forth, well, we'll miss the point. So we won't be able to get rid of that false appearance, in that we don't understand this union of dependent arising and emptiness and so forth. So if we believe that everything that appears, the way that everything exists the way it appears, we won't be able to really deal with phenomena. So it would be like, here it says that from protected discussions missing the point, my old mother is liable to flee. So there's no relation to emptiness. If there's a sense emptiness is something totally different from the objects of appearances. For instance, this book, if you take this book, it appears as inherently existent, as truly existent. So how does it appear to us? When we say truly existence, how does this mind appear? How does it apprehend true existence? How does this give rise to the different afflictive emotions such as aversion and attachment? So we need to understand that, like all these aspects we need to understand with regard to this mind in relation to this book here, and not see an object of negation somewhere distant. So some they just take the words, they get caught in the web of words without their mind changing. They just get caught up in the words, and they don't really understand the actual message of Lama Tsongkhapa's teaching. For instance, Lama Tsongkhapa says it very clearly: to practice the Dharma, anything, our Dharma practice, whatever Dharma practice we should do, it should in a way affect, it should weaken or undermine our self-grasping. If that doesn't happen, we're not really practicing the Dharma properly. It's not that we understand emptiness, we miss the point. So therefore, it's with regard to the object of negation, how does it appear? How does this true existence appear to us? How does the mind apprehend it, and so forth? This we need to understand. It says also in the entry into the middle way, it talks about that. So when they hear emptiness, a lot of people, when they hear emptiness lacks inherent existence and so forth, when we hear the vast, so for a lot of people, it's like when they hear the vast doesn't exist inherently, there's a sense there is no vast. So the vast doesn't exist from its own side. It doesn't exist objectively. Right away, oh, there's no vast. So right away, this is a sense nothing is there. The vast is not there. There's nothing there. So it seems like, so when you hear the phenomena don't exist in and of themselves, the vast doesn't exist in and of itself, there's a sense it's like not there. That's the sense. But actually, we should, of course, come to understand when we say the lack of inherent existence, it does relate to the vasa itself and not to something separate. So anyway, it's enough for today. And now it's time for you to ask questions. So we've got a little bit time left for question and answers. And I believe we have some questions left from last time. Is that right, Kumbin?
Yes, are we all in the same channel? We need to... Now we're going to finish the interpretation channel, and we're all going to go into the main channel. Oh, is it finished? Yes. Here we go. So Shankarji has a question. I just try to unmute you.
Kumbin, we don't have questions from last time?
Yeah.
I think they were all answered
Okay.
by your review session.
Okay.
That's what I understood. Otherwise, let me check again. Yes. So
Sure.
if people have questions from last time, please write me a quick note and I put you in. Yeah. Shankarji, I think you're already unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My gratitude for the sharing, Rinpoche. Okay. I am slightly lost today, but actually quite some time now since the sessions have started, because the first session we talked about I. For me, I is a mind stream which stops in a body like a water stops in a dam. So I is in every part of me. That's my perception. That's my understanding. So I is everywhere. And you said I doesn't exist. So somewhere I think there is a contradiction, because for me, I is a mind stream. Second thing is that stillness. I think stillness is something very difficult to comprehend or understand, because at each and every time, different karmic seeds tend to germinate or tend to grow. Hence, your I is constantly changing. So in this particular thing, how is stillness ever possible? Is it actually possible? Okay. Then linked to that is this part of emptiness. Now, emptiness, the way I understood it today was that it is like a shadow. You know, you can see a shadow, you can perhaps perceive a shadow, but actually the shadow doesn't exist. You can't hold anything or grasp anything. Now, the theory of dependent arising. So what does emptiness arise out of? What does stillness arise out of? Thank you.
What does emptiness arise? Sorry, can you just check, Changka, Mr. Shankar, what do you mean with stillness?
Stillness, where does it arise from? What is it dependent on arising?
What does stillness mean? Can you define what you mean with stillness in this context?
Yeah, stillness in our context, stillness of our thoughts, stillness of a state of mind that we are, that which is still. That's what I understand.
Peaceful.
Yeah, peaceful. That's what is the stillness I'm assuming Rinpoche is talking about.
The peace of liberation.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
Namshila kola kandi shyo di dire ta ko tos go thomsha ta kasangima tos go tsuya to shiri ta tirin tos go thomsha ta koran karisna ta tanda kasa ngema rumshi sungdang la dene ta nga seadi semgi gyun sur chire ta koran sambala nga seadi semgi gyun re ani nga seadi ta korangi lugi chashi korangi semgi chashi tamche nga sur chire ta inaya nga 요마레 음식 나 요마레 숨어지 아니 쉬워 다 거를 쉬워서야 되다 빛이 달바다고 숨겨서라 아니 죽도 각보레스 대인아야 다지 각보레 뭐니시나 쉬워서나 다 달바디다 뭐니시나 지당 또 각보레 다디 강델라야 니마 미스버레 가이스나 계시 제제라 먼저 레기 저분용 거야라 또 달바다 영역 거라면도 아니 근데 돈이 세야디 또 돈이 초직디 딤나나시레 또 딤나나야디 뭐니시나 요 말에 페나 신동기 딤나다오시다 니마샤나 네 신동기 딤나다올레나디 뭐니시나 지야 요 말에 진주 메바레 또 요는 요 말레스 아니 지고 칼로다페 또 또야 코로 콘루치요 요 말에 최선다 돈이 세야디 가르레 그런 제법에 못 당해 또 못 통해서 다저 노르드노 나 세디 찾아 나레스라다 샘기 균디 나레 다디 요마레 좀 소야 나신 아니 카라바세디 고 갖고레 용기 마레스 아니 돈이 디카레스 다저 노르드노 디레
생디 나레스 순기 진나 샤그레스 수부기 수수기 차셰 창문 나레스 러버이나 나 랑문이 두고 차는고 디러디가나 나 랑신지 메버레 세디 시투 마레 디닌 겨레
야세
비제 나루를 가르치고레스 슈베이나 수부기 차셰 타다 리워 디제 데디야 나마레 넘버 10야 나마레 이네 나마레디 넘버 10를 띠네 나따바레 나따장 나스니 따장 다시 넘버 10 코라야 따장 안데 따장마도 랑기 문에 두고 지정요 말이스 낭세 창마 통세 창마 낭문이 메버레 세디 숨로 나오는 디 간데스레 지러디간가 나 세디로 낭장레스 랑디간가 따장레스 랑디간가 센디 나 마레스 센디 나 민비 주진 가레스 랑디 주진 탈도디 주진 쪼디 센디 나이나 센디 다부인고 나스니 다부로 다부 센디 다부래요 말에 나기 원래 나이 센스 맞죠 센디 치랑기 센 말에 치랑기 센 치랑기 류 나보다 요분이부터 집어 인식이 말어 나보다 나기 언니디 지 인식이 말해 이송고 지네 저 주신지네 주신이네 센디 나래 슬라유리가 나타 센디 나임바이나 나 세디 센장로 괴로 다 센다 나스니 지로 다 센여는 나유바 센면은 나메와 나 딜러디가 치랑기 센 세디 안데 니 세베네 그지 난당가랑도 무슨 용심이 센디 마레슬레르베 다디 나 인주기 센디 가르레스 센디랑 차라시베이나 노래 타고요레스 멜로디지
Now, it's difficult to say that the mind is the I. So you say that with regard to the I, that's the mind stream. But that is difficult. I mean, to say any aspect, you said also that any part of you is the I. Well, again, that is difficult to say. That would not really hold or would not be tenable or feasible to say, because that would mean the I exists in and of itself. It exists inherently. So the scriptures, they negate that any aspect of the body, whatever aspect you take, it's not the I. The mind is also not the I. So how does the I exist? It is merely labeled. It is merely imputed on the basis of every part of the body and every aspect of the mind. Now, here we say independence on the basis of imputation, which is mind and body, we label I. But even that basis of imputation, mind and body, that is also merely labeled on its basis of imputation. And therefore we say that all phenomena are mere appearances and they do not exist in and of themselves. Now, we say the I is merely the appearance based on mind and body and due to this labeling process. Now, why can we say that the mind, that the I is not the mind, or that the mind is not the I? Why? Because the word I implies an owner. In particular, the Tibetan word da, which is the word for self, it's the same syllable as the word for owner. Therefore, it's implied here the I is that which owns mind and body. But if the I were the mind, then the mind would be the owner. But actually, we say it is my mind. It is my mind. Therefore, the mind is that which is owned. And you can't say that the owner of something and that which is owned are identical. There's a difference between the two, which is why we say the I is not the self. But it's also not separable. You can't separate the I and the mind, but they're not identical, the I being merely labeled. And if you were to say that the mind is the I, the question that arises, what type of mind are you talking about? The mind that is awake, the mind that is asleep, there's so many different levels of minds in terms of coarseness and subtlety, so it'd be very difficult to posit the I.
니네 생쿠랑 생장라 나스 레기오이너다 생장라 나스 샤바이나 아니 나스 얘기 타니도 용거예요 말 그 심바라고 센센센스 레딘도 나스 용거랑 시그마를 뒷장 나이 뭐 있는다 생장 나이 뭐 있는 나스 얘기 타니도 용거예요 말이에요 제자 나스 얘기 된다리 그 다부기 된다리 다부 제니부디 가가 임부 세부리 아니 나랑수 루린제다 나 세디 나다 최세디 인제지 루 샤베 낭샤지 자고 인제지 루이 간데스 문진치고 러디간라 나 싱이디 다부다 유신이부디 다기오 임버지 인제기 루라 문진티 요레 제산 인제기 루 샤베 낭샤 나로라 나디 다부다 유신이부디 다기오라 샤디간라 인제기 루이 샤베 낭샤 나로라 지랑기 시간 지부이나 인제기 루이 샤베 낭샤 쿠란기 쿠란 랑 겐다 수고래 이용 시마로 세상 이지제 아 쇼신다 지내리다 양 치기 주연스들이 나중에 말한 수기 타니 마부지 양 겐도고래 예체랑 통그래 체랑기 나 통그래 말한 수기 수수기 빨라 아마라 하고 그래 빨라 아마라 통그래 이나 양 빨라 아마라 심바 통그래 베스나 심바 통그면 도스가 나서 또 지나다게 통구도 지나기 난주 가르치는 게 미네 하고도 이 돈에 최바제네 생기 나로 가르친 게면 강라 강상 최바제 통구도 로지베 지바 제통구도 너들 마도 지나기 심바게 통구도 짠슨 말에 나 공도 지나기 송단제네 생단 아니부디 베 자샤 자탕 지랑 임바이나 나 통만 통세데 센통만 통 지구지로 이 낭샤디야 무게버 차로 예스
네. In particular, so Rinpoche is focusing on the sense that the I refers to the mind itself. Well, that would be really difficult because then that would contradict your previous idea that all parts of you are the I. If the mind is the I, then how could the physical parts be, as you said, like any part of you is the I? That wouldn't make sense. Which is therefore, Rinpoche argues, well, we do talk of the I as that which owns something. And as Rinpoche mentioned early on, that which just owns our mind and body. That is the sense. So when we talk about the sense in which we think of I, the conventional I here, it is really the owner. It is that which owns mind and body being owned. And in that sense, it would be contradictory, really, just from that perspective. Likewise, it would also, your view on the mental stream, the mind stream, the mental continuum being the I, it would also contradict the way we speak. I say, for instance, I see you. I say, I see my brother, I see my mother. But I'm not seeing their mind. I'm not seeing your mind. Rinpoche says, I can only guess what your state of mind is. But still we talk about, I see this person, I see you. Well, how would that be possible if your mental stream, if your mind stream were you? So that's all contradictory.
디천베 추탕제 수수 무인의 수토버지 차천보이나 코란기 무인의 코란 투여보이나 코란 가리임버디 코란기 챈투고 코란기 뚠투고 코란 가리임버 코란 지비 뚠투고 코란기 내당 가리여버디 코란 지비 무인의 타제투고 아니 코란 무인의 수 마차요 그래서 코란기 무인의 수 마차여보이나 나세디 강라 유장 마인고로 신을 뛰네가 인글을 뛰대가 상말을 마차고해 줘디 수수 나디리다 나나세 나디 신을 뛰디 마 말해 신을 뛰디 신래 항상 신을 뛰디 나이 배천 세우지지네 슈버 있는다 디 가르스 오레스나 때나 몸부르르 수만 하신 수류디 수류파류 수류디 파류를 뛰네 수류 문진고가 마도 파류 매나야 수류 쿠란기 문에 수류 임버 주요나리다 수류 쿠란기 문에 쿠란 수류 임버 차요이나 아니 만수 파류 레레나야 수류디 파류제스기 말에 수류제스라고 지금 강도 쇼 탄제를 뒤도 수류 차로 수류디 쿠란기 문에 수류 차요이나 파류 매나야 수류 차고 이는 찌지보다 수류 파류로 내유가 차고 이 농시에 매어지리 니네 수리세디 가서 이흉원의 예배를 수리스고 파슈레사디가 그냥 파슈디 수리 차지지네 아기 수리세디 파류스고 파슈 수리 제가 쿠란기 무인의 수리 차이가 있는 쿠란기 쿠란 수리인 타지고 그래 제가 넘버 탄제 수리인 거지 그래 이 민도 나는 오물루게 민발을 비자지 나와도 민바 저 시버 쿠란기 쿠란 지베이나 아니 시버 쿠란기 쿠란 세워 지고 그래 마미 세워 지고 그래 민바 지버 지고 그래 민바 지버 지나 민바 양메 통화 타고 민바디 가서 난고니 가서 통고도 민바 지나 민바 양메 통화 타고 민바 가서 통고 제가 근데 산당 어디 가라
Yes.
이네 샤이 아도 메디버지
Yes, sir. So what's most important to understand is that here the self existed inherently. Well, the problem is it would just be exactly if the way it appears to you, the way you described it, if it existed inherently, that's the way you describe it as an inherent existent self, well, it would be very difficult to talk of others, for example, in the sense that we say I and others, they're dependent on each other. So I versus others. But if it was inherently I, all others would also be I. All others would also be the I. Everything would be, well, you couldn't talk of, like, from the point of view of either all others would also be the I, or as in, like, you wouldn't be the I, because it would just be others. So it's very difficult to distinguish between I and others in that sense, if it existed inherently. So Rinpoche gave a few examples. He said, for instance, if here and there existed inherently, if here and there existed in and of themselves, then just as with the I and others. So if I existed inherently, then it wouldn't be I only in relation to other phenomena. It would always be I from all perspectives. So it was even from the perspective of another person. So the example Rinpoche uses for that is here and there. If here existed inherently as here, so we talk about the mountain here and the mountain there. It's actually from the perspective of me standing on this mountain here that I talk about the other mountain as being the mountain over there. But if the mountain I'm standing on right now were inherently the mountain here, then even if I change, if I go climb down this mountain and climb up the other mountain, if I look now from the perspective of this other mountain, the mountain that I previously stood on would still be the mountain here, because it's inherently here. It does not depend on something other than itself, such as the perspective, from the perspective of the other mountain. No, whatever is here from one perspective would have to be here from all perspectives, and whatever is there, over there, would have to be over there from all perspectives. So Rinpoche says, if something existed inherently, I and other would no longer make sense, and here and there would no longer make sense. Another example Rinpoche gave, he says, the example is given by Nagarjuna in terms of lightness and darkness. Again, they're dependent on each other. But if lightness and darkness, if they existed inherently, then lightness would be darkness and darkness would be lightness. And that would mean lightness, there's this reasoning that Nagarjuna presents, in that he says, well, then lightness would illuminate itself. And if lightness illuminates itself, since that's the function of lightness, to illuminate, right? And lightness would then actually illuminate not the darkness, it would illuminate the lightness, because there's no difference. So if lightness illuminates itself, then darkness needs to obstruct itself. Darkness has the function to obstruct. So there couldn't be any, you couldn't see any darkness, because darkness would obstruct itself. That's a reasoning Nagarjuna presents. So in any way, these are all different kind of absurdities that would well, come into existence, that would appear, or that would arise independence on this view that the I exists inherently, or that your mind stream is the I and that exists inherently.
Rinpoche, there are actually 3 more questions, but time is up. Is Rinpoche happy to take maybe more question, or shall we leave for next time, Rinpoche?
One more.
Yes, Rinpoche. Next one is from, oh, he disappeared. From Jackie. Jackie is next. Jackie, could you please unmute?
Thank you very much for both of you. Thank you. I didn't quite understand what non-duality of mind means.
Non-duality of what?
Mind.
Mind?
Yeah, he said that when you realize emptiness directly, there's a non-duality of mind. I didn't know what non-duality of mind meant.
I said that the mind.
Yeah,
said the mind is non. What I said was what I meant is that the mind that realizes emptiness directly is a non-dual mind.
Yeah, right? I don't understand what non-dual mind is.
Okay, non-dual mind. Rinpoche tangi soya di sonra toni ngusno to shera nina dan terlore. Ta nina dan terlore yu tanda kable.
디 니나한테 채웠어요. 디라 니나 디라 시당 송요. 오늘 무슨도 또 용디가라. 또네 지지나고 샤용디가라. 돈이 동상장 가야 만통 소리시고. 랑원의 주비 취지안 매베 동상 동바 디장마도 왜 신가야 통요 말이에요. 동바장 통이장 동바장 지야만 통이장 마통었어. 마통한테 통화이지 아니 마통한테 통화 담보 숨버려. 디 돈이 통이 뭐라 돈이 시비스 뭐라 공주에 나오지요.
네.
근데 가자마자도 카도나주에 나오지요. 공주에 나와지. 이가라 아니 유단 유진 근데 말한서 유단 유진 가르 통용의 있는 유단 유진 장제도 나야지. 유 파주여 봐도 유진이 수주여 봐. 유단 유진 수수니여 봐 나오지요. 이 유단 유진이 니나디야요 봐. Sama sebe ngaransu ki tomba ni goyo digala tomba ni gin dana su de dinji tomba ni gin dana ji ya lu lu sha che ji goya ma do mun su de la ba le mi de ba na xin je tong ni tong tu wo ma xie zang dinji ni na ji yi sun ge na wo yo ma de gong zu be na wo chang no yu de yu jin ta de ge na wo di no ani dinji na wo di no na wo ta mo no ba yin zang ni na mo ba
no sé 덴족이 나와 디난 쭉 말아. 덴족이 나와 디안 쭉으래. 넣었어. 다 숨으래야 시라 다야다. 군주가 나와 전식이 나와. 유다 유식 양친도 나와. 근데 덴족이 나와.
디안 군주 나와 딘데 다 시바케면도.
So Rinpoche said, well, actually, when we say non-dual, there are actually 3, or I checked again, so maybe even 4 ways in which the mind is non-dual. In the sense that, what do we mean with the mind that realizes emptiness directly? It is a mind to which nothing but emptiness appears. Nothing but emptiness appears. So what does that mean? Just the mere lack of inherent existence. Nothing but the lack of inherent existence appears to it, which means it's just the non-findability of inherent existence that appears to it, which is why it says in the scriptures, the supreme seeing is seeing the not. So the not seeing of inherent existence is the superior seeing. So in other words, this mind that realizes emptiness directly is really the mind that is just perceiving that non-findability of inherent existence. That's all that appears to it, which means it's non-dual in a sense. So what is this duality? The duality refers to the appearance of conventional phenomena. That's one aspect. No conventional truth appears to it. And included in that is, for instance, the meaning generality, the kind of the general idea we have of emptiness. When we understand emptiness initially without realizing it directly, when we initially start to understand emptiness, at that time we have first a generic image, some kind of idea of emptiness that appears together with the mind that conceptually understands emptiness. But when you realize it directly, you don't have this appearance of this generic image of emptiness. So in that sense, non-dual. Secondly, Rinpoche says that, well, also ordinarily with any other mind, other than the mind that realizes emptiness directly, there's a sense, there's a notion that the mind itself has, that this is the mind and the object is over there. There's a sense of a distance between that which is observed and the observer, the mind and its observed object. Again, for the mind realizing emptiness directly, this duality of mind over here, object over there, that disappears. So non-dual in that sense. So non-dual from the point of view, just to repeat, from the point of view of conventional appearance, and non-dual from the point of view of this distance between observer and that which is observed. And then also there is no appearance of inherent existence, this unrealistic appearance. Also that doesn't take place. So from that point of view, again, no non-dual appearance. So from all these different, from the point of view of none of those appearing, we say the mind is non-dual.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rinpoche.
Thank you.
O sa shi perki chukchi me tok tram rirap ling zini di gempa di sangye zingdu mikte uwai trokun namdak zing la chupa shok. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his wide divine action spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Idam Guratna Mandala Kamnyayatayami. Changchok Semchok Rinpoche Magyapanam Kyegyoche Gyapanyampa Mepayang Gong Ne Gong Tu Pelwa Shok. Kangri Rawe Kowe Shinkam Diam Pendang Dewa Malu Jonwe Ne Chenre Zekwan Tenzin Gyatsui Chape Si De Bardu Tengyoche. Jesus Rinpoche, thank you so much, Rinpoche, for those precious teachings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you next.
See you very soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Geshe-la, for your excellent translation. Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody joining us. And if, in case you didn't understand everything today, then tomorrow, just in case, just saying, then tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we have a review summary question and answer with Geshe Kelsang Wangmo. Yeah, so we can understand emptiness and dependent arising better. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon, evening, wherever you are. See you very soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, Geshe-la.